Ancient Greece is, along with Christianity, the birthplace of Western culture. Its history is divided into 4 periods: the Dark Ages, Archaic period, Classical period, and the Hellenistic period. Greek civilization originates from the Cretan or Minoan civilization of the island of Crete and the Mycenaean, in the city of Mycenae. The Cretans had already built palaces such as the Palace of Knossos, with large rooms, monumental staircases, gardens and warehouses dedicated to the legendary King Minos. As for the Mycenaean culture, it was located in the center and south of the Greek peninsula. They are also noted for being great builders. The most important archaeological site is Mycenae, with the Lion Gate. These early Greeks formed the first advanced culture, with the origins of written Greek language. The script was recently named Linear B. The Mycenaean economy was very structured and depended on the trade of products such as oil, wool, wine, and slaves. They are considered the direct ancestors of the Greeks. When the Mycenaean civilization collapsed, we entered the Dark Ages. It is so called because of the few sources and documents that have been found from this period. This period ran from about 1200 to 776 BC. The Dark Ages in the Greek world meant the transition from Bronze to Iron Age technology, the transition from the pre-Hellenic to the Hellenic. It encompasses what happened during the centuries that separate the decomposition of the Mycenaean world and the birth of the Hellenic world. At the end of the Dark Ages, the Archaic Age began from 776 to around 499 BC. This was a time when the Greeks needed more land and managed to expand their territories. The Greek tribes settled in mainland Greece and the Aegean Islands in the first instance, eventually conquering Asia Minor, southern Italy, and Sicily, known as Magna Graecia. These Indo-European tribes spoke different variants of the future Greek language, which was related to the Mycenaean language. These peoples were the Ascians, Ionians, Dorians, Aeolians, Arcadians. In the Archaic era, the nobility took power from the kings and the different state cities or polis were formed: Athens, Thebes, Sparta, Corinth, Argos. The need to find new land, population growth, and social conflicts led them to seek new independent colonies, both in the east and the west. This spurred a huge economic takeoff. Aspects that favored colonization were the emergence of the Greek hoplite or infantry soldier, the progressive use of the trireme, a 3-row vessel with more agile oars than the Phoenician vessels, and the introduction of currency for commercial transactions. In the decision to found new colonies, as well as in the choice of their location, the Oracle of Delphi, which we will talk about later, played a pivotal role. In this way, Greek culture expanded. Even if they were independent state cities that sometimes fought each other, there was a sense of belonging to the same common culture and a sense of unity as they shared the same language, and had the same gods and beliefs, and met at the same celebrations. The Romans called the inhabitants of ancient Greece Greeks, although they called themselves Hellenes, with the name Hellas being used to describe the territory in which they settled. After the Archaic era came the Classical Age, 499 BC to 323 BC. During this period, the Greco-Persian Wars, which saw a league of Greek peoples fighting against the fearsome Persian Empire, occurred. It all started when the Ionian cities of Greece and Asia Minor rebelled against Persian rule. Soon, the other Hellenic cities formed a military confederation against a Persian army under the command of King Darius I, starting the First Greco-Persian War, which ended in a Greek victory. The war resumed in 480 BC under the orders of King Xerxes, son of Darius. The Greek allies, with Sparta and Athens at the helm, managed to defeat the Persian Empire again. Famous Greek victories were those in Salamis and Plataea. Also of note was the Spartan heroic defense of the Thermopylae Gorge, led by King Leonidas. The fate, not only of Greece, but of Western civilization, had been played out over a series of decisive days. Athens began a golden era under the rule of Pericles that changed the Western world. However, Sparta soon sought to free itself from Athenian power. The Spartans and the Athenians, former allies, began a long war called the Peloponnesian War, which concluded with the defeat of the Athenians and the new supremacy of Sparta. However, there would soon be a new renaissance of Athens following the weakening of Sparta after its war against Thebes. In this last period, the Hellenistic, 323 to 30 BC, Alexander, son of King Philip II of Macedon, inherited a defeated Greece from his father and ended up subduing the entire Persian Empire. His conquests created a vast empire from Egypt to India, helping to spread Greek culture throughout the Mediterranean and much of the East. From around 200 BC, the Romans began to seize all the areas colonized by the Greeks, eventually taking the last of the kingdoms of the successors of Alexander's empire, the kingdom of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, with Cleopatra as their last iconic leader. After the defeat of Cleopatra and Mark Antony in 31 BC by Octavian troops, the Romans would eventually absorb much of the heritage of Greek culture. The forms of government in the Greek cities were very different. The best known and most influential models were those of Sparta and Athens. Sparta represented a warrior people with great military preparation. It was rigid and austere. For a long time, there was a diarchy, a form of government in which two kings belonging to the great Spartan families ruled over the people. Sparta's contribution to culture is poorer than that of the Athenian culture. Athens was the most important city. It was a city with a port that thrived on commerce. The name of the city comes from the goddess Athena. Athens means sons of Athena. According to Greek mythology, Athena was Zeus's daughter. Athena is the goddess of wisdom, but she is also a protective and combatant goddess. She is usually depicted with an owl. In Athens was born the political system that we now know as democracy, the government of the people, the most perfect form of government, although the Athenian system differs in many respects from which that we know today. It was Pericles who laid the foundations for this democratic government, but in previous centuries, the work of legislators such as Solon and tyrants such as Pisistratus and Clisthenes made it possible for Athenian citizens to participate in political tasks. The Acropolis of Athens housed the city's treasure and various temples for religious rites and altars for offerings. She was honored in the Parthenon. The Parthenon in Athens was ordered to be rebuilt by Pericles, as the Persians swept through the ancient Acropolis in the Second Greco-Persian War. It was constructed as a thank you from the city to the gods for their ultimate victory. The architects were Ictinus and Callicrates, who were under the command of the Athenian architect and sculptor Phidias, creator of the sculptural decoration and the great Chryso-elephantine statue of the goddess Athena Parthenos, which every year was showered with offerings. An example is the Panathenaea. This procession crossed the city. It began in the Agora and ascended to the Acropolis. During this festival, a dress known as peplos was offered to Athena. The Agora in Athens was the center of political, administrative, commercial, and social activity. Apart from the Acropolis, there were other kinds of sacred enclosures. These were the shrines. A shrine was a pan-Hellenic enclosure. Therefore, its financing, unlike the Acropolis, depended on the entire Greek world. The Sanctuary of Delphi was the most important in the world. It was dedicated to the god Apollo. In it was the Oracle. The Oracle of Apollo in Delphi became a really important institution in Greece. When asked, a priestess, called a pythoness, went into a trance and uttered mumbled words that a priest then gave coherence to in the form of proverbs. The one who sought advice drew from him a prediction, which could be interpreted in many ways. The oracle never failed. What could fail was the prediction. Pilgrims from all over Greece and even foreigners approached Delphi to consult the oracle, which played a very important role in the founding of new colonies or in matters of war. Another famous shrine is the shrine located in Olympia. It was dedicated to the god Zeus. The Olympic Games was held every 4 years at this shrine. The Olympic Games served not only to honor the gods, but to bring the different Hellenic peoples closer together. During the competition, a truce was enacted, allowing athletes to travel safely from their homes to Olympia. The Olympic Games in ancient Greece were quite different from modern ones. There were fewer events, and only free men who spoke Greek could compete. The Greeks competed in the discipline of running races, wrestling, discus throwing, javelin, jumping, horse racing, and other tests. The prize was a crown of olive branches and recognition in their home city. Poets often made them celebrities, and this enabled them to live the rest of their lives at the expense of the treasury. The first Olympic Games are believed to have been held in 776 BC, a date that marks the beginning of the Archaic era. Some of the Greek gods had already appeared at this point. The Greeks believed in a pantheon of 12 gods who, according to mythology, lived on Mount Olympus. It all started when Uranus committed incest with his mother Gaia, Mother Earth. From this incest came the first Cyclops and then the Titans. From the Titans, the gods arose. These legends and myths are the foundation and basis of Greek culture. The adventures of the gods are narrated among other sources in the Theogony of Hesiod and in the epic writings of the poet Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad recounts the destruction of Troy. A confederation of Achaeans, including Ulysses and Achilles, set out for Troy, as the Trojan prince Paris had kidnapped the beautiful Helen of Sparta. For 10 years, the Greeks besieged the city. Hector of Troy, brother of Paris, unleashed the anger of Achilles after killing his dear friend Patroclus. Achilles ends up killing Hector. The fate of the battle changed when Ulysses hatched a very effective plan: to build a great wooden horse and to ride his best warriors inside. The Trojans, believing that it was an offering, allowed the horse to pass its walls. A huge mistake. Finally, Troy falls. In the Odyssey, Ulysses, known as Odysseus, after his battle in the Trojan War, returns to Ithaca, his home. The Odyssey recounts a hard journey back, full of dangerous adventures. The date of the composition of the Iliad and the Odyssey is controversial. The majority opinion places it in the second half of the 8th century BC. There are even those who dispute the authorship of these classics. It was even thought that Troy never existed until its discovery in the 19th century by Heinrich Schliemann. The events in Troy, however, date back long before Homer. They go back to the early Dark Ages. It seems therefore that the Homeric poems are the product of an oral tradition transmitted through generations. The history of Greece begins with the legend of Troy. The Greeks also produced great plays, where an entire artificial world was built to represent human life. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides created great tragedies. These authors are from the classical era, the time of a more splendid ancient Greece. They were performed in the theatre. Greek theatre originated in an open-air circular space called an orchestra, in which a wide variety of activities were performed, from artistic performances, dances, recitations, and musical pieces, to civic and religious events. Greek theatres were supported by a natural slope to build the stalls. The ancient Greeks are also considered the forerunners of today's Western thought, a way of thinking that uses reason and arguments, and one that values logic and reason as the most valuable tools. To understand Greek philosophy, you have to know the philosophy of 3 figures that have determined Western thought to this day: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Socrates lived in the time of Pericles. The earlier thinkers are called pre-Socratic, like the mathematician Pythagoras. Socrates' disciple was Plato, and Plato's disciple was Aristotle. Aristotle witnessed the rise of Macedonia and was the instructor of Alexander the Great. The harmony of proportions and the representation of the human figure were the central elements in Hellenic art. To study Greek art, it is important to distinguish between archaic, classical, and Hellenistic periods. The most noteworthy buildings are religious temples, such as the Parthenon, which were adjusted to certain proportions. They could be one of the three main styles or orders: Doric, Ionic, or Corinthian. Sculpture is another example of beauty and proportions. The most important Greek sculptors were Phidias, creator of the sculptural work of the Parting; Praxiteles, creator of Hermes of Olympia, with his famous Praxitelean curve; Myron, who created the famous Discobolus; and Polykletos, who wrote a treatise called Canon and is the creator of the Doryphorus, his most outstanding sculpture. Although there are not many samples of painting in Greek art, there are samples of ceramics on which are depicted scenes from literary epics and daily life. We have therefore seen the importance of ancient Greece, which was hugely influential in our culture, in terms of language, politics, education systems, philosophy, science and the arts. Also, Greek culture, and by extension Roman culture, had an important boom in later periods, such as the Renaissance and the Neoclassical period.